Hello everyone and welcome to the first tutorial in my new tutorial series. In this series we're going to be creating a simple but still very awesome 3D game engine from scratch, which I'm hoping by about tutorial 25 will include terrain generation, lighting, third-person camera, fog, a skybox, multiple light sources, much more, and also include multiplayer support. We're going to be using the lightweight Java game library and the new OpenGL stuff, none of the fixed function pipeline stuff because a lot of that is now deprecated. So we'll be using the new programmable pipeline of OpenGL 3 and above. Before we get started, just a couple of things about this series. I do assume a fairly good level of Java knowledge. This isn't a Java tutorial, so I'm not going to be explaining any of the Java related aspects of it. Apart from that, you don't need to have any prior OpenGL experience. I'm going to be doing a complete code walkthrough and I'll explain all of the important bits as I go along. With that in mind, if you have done a bit of OpenGL before, then the first couple of tutorials probably won't be for you because they're going to be about setting up the display and such, so you may want to skip the first few episodes. Before you get started, you will need to have a new Java project set up with lightweight Java game library and the slick utils library installed. And if you want to watch a tutorial on how to do that, you can click here, or you can click the link in the description to go to Oscar's tutorial on setting up the lightweight Java game library environment. He actually has his own lightweight Java game library tutorial series, but it does use the fixed function pipeline, which, as I mentioned, we're not going to be using. So hopefully you have now got your Java project set up with the correct libraries installed, and we can go ahead and get started programming. So let's create our first package. This is going to be where the meat of the render engine goes, so let's call it the render engine. And in here we're going to create our first class. And the first thing we need when we're making a game is of course a display. So we're going to create a class all about managing the display called the display manager. And we'll go ahead and create that. And in here there's three methods that we need to create. The first one is going to be to open the display at the beginning when we start up the game, so we'll call it create display. Secondly, we need a method to update the display every single frame, and we'll call that update display. And finally, when we finish playing the game, we'll want to exit it and close down the display, so we need to create a method for that as well. So going back to the first method, let's fill it in now. The first thing we need to do when we create a display is to determine the size of the display. And we set the size of the display by doing display.setDisplayMode. And this takes in a display mode. So let's go ahead and create a new display mode. And the display mode needs to know the width and the height of the display that we want to create. So I'm going to declare these up at the top. A couple of ints, one for the width, which is going to be 1280 pixels, and I'm going to set the height of the display to 720 pixels, and you can set these to whatever value you want, really, whatever suits you, and just put these into the display mode constructor, the width and then the height. So once we've determined, we need to surround this with try catch. Once we've determined the width and the height of the display, we need to actually create the display, which is pretty simple. Display.create. We could use this one, but we want to set a few of the settings first. So we're going to use this one that takes in a pixel format and a ContextAttribs. The pixel format, you can simply just use the no argument constructor there to create a new pixel format and import that. But the ContextAttribs, we want to set a few things first, so we're going to set that up here. So create yourself a new ContextAttribs called attribs, and the constructor here actually takes in the version of OpenGL that we want to use, so we're going to put in 3.2 because that's the version of OpenGL that we'll be using. And two more settings that we need to set. We're going to do attribs.withForwardCompatible because we want it to be forward compatible, so we'll set that to true. And secondly, we just need to do attribs.withProfileCore. There it is, and we'll set that to true as well. These are just a couple of settings, you don't need to worry too much, they're not overly important. And there you go. The final thing we need to do is to tell OpenGL where in the display it can render the game, and we want to choose the whole display, and we do that by doing GL viewport, and this needs to know the bottom left of the display and the top right of the display. So the bottom left is just going to be the very bottom of the display, 0, 0, and the top right of the display is going to be the width and the height of the display in pixels. So this just tells OpenGL to use the whole of the display to render the game in. So now let's move on to the closeDisplay method, and this is really simple. It's just a call to the Display.destroy method, and that will close the display. For updating the display, we have to do two things. First, we need to sync the display, display.sync, and this synchronizes the game to run at a steady FPS, and we can set the FPS that we want the game to run at, and I'm going to set it up here as so the FPS cap is 120, and we put that value into the display.sync method, and then also we just need to do display.update. Very simple. So that's it for the display manager class. That's all we need to do with the display. So let's go and create a new package where we're going to test out what we've just done, and we'll call this package engine tester. And in here we're going to create the class that's going to have the main game loop in it. So I'll call this main game loop, and you want to make sure that it has the main method in there. So when we run our game, the first thing we want to happen is for the display to open. So let's do, we've just written a method for that. That's display manager dot create display. That will open up the display. Then we want to go into the actual game loop. And this is where all of the objects are updated every frame, all the rendering happens. So we've got the game logic and the rendering, and of course every frame we want to update the display. So display manager dot update, and we want to check when to exit this loop. We want to exit the loop when the user tries to exit the display by clicking the cross. And we can check if that's happened by doing Display.isCloseRequested. So this will loop until someone clicks the cross. And finally, when the game loop has been exited, we want to close down the display by doing DisplayManager.closeDisplay. And we can run that now, and that should work nicely. There we go, opens up the display, and when we click the X, it will close that down. One other thing I can show you here, we can also set the title of the display by doing display.setTitle, and you can set this to whatever you want. I'm going to set it to our first display, and that should work now. So let's go ahead and run that, and there you go. So that's it for this tutorial. I know it was a bit basic, but I have to start somewhere. Next week it will get a bit more interesting, going into the rendering side of things using VBOs and VAOs. So do look out for that. But thank you very much for watching this tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. Do subscribe if you haven't already. I hope you have a fantastic week, and I will see you all in the next tutorial.